Hello and welcome to the VanRein Compliance Podcast, a show that secures the future of your business with a clear plan to reduce your risk. I'm your co-host, Rob.
And I'm Dawn, and today we're going to talk to our legendary penetration tester, James Kashevos, the owner of Tetsu Enterprises. And we're going to talk the ins and outs of the penetration testing and why you need one to secure your business. All right. Hi, James. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Rob and Dawn, I really think legendary is pushing it quite a bit, but
well, we think you are, so go with it.
we're all legends in our own mind. Come on, James.
Yeah, there we go.
And you're the legend that the first guest to break our podcast platform. So this is take two for the people that don't know.
It's part of my nature. I'm a tester.
Yeah.
I got to break things.
There you go. Ethical tested. Yeah,
it was a very ethical test. It was just unfortunate.
Never seen Chrome die. It just died.
Oh goodness!
All right.
Well, let's start off by introducing you to our listeners, James, and then we're going to go into what is penetration testing, if I can talk, and the different types of penetration tests.
All right. Well, I'm James Kashevos. I own Tetsu Enterprises. And I spend essentially the vast majority of my time doing penetration tests, at least on a technical side, I should say. So that's that's what I do. As far as what a penetration test is, lost my train of thought there. Cut that one out. Yeah. As far as what a penetration test is, it's really just kind of it's not honestly that far off from your normal type of QA or software testing. It's just a different mindset, kind of brought to that, and a bit of a different skill set. Because you're still looking for, problems, design flaws, misconfigurations, that sort of thing. But instead of, kind of coming at the perspective of what will cause problems for my users, you're coming at it from a perspective of, I'm an attacker. How could I get access to something in your, environment? How could I attack you in some way? So there's a couple of different types of pen tests. Well, more than a couple. I should be clear. There's quite a few, but there's a few that we really kind of focus on. Network is a big one, so that's where you're targeting your actual hosts and systems. Whether those be exposed to the internet or internally. There's kind of two separations there. You've got your like I said, your external targets. So your external penetration tests, that's mostly targeting kind of what devices you have exposed to the internet. So that might be web servers. That might be, you might have a VPN server exposed. You might have some miscellaneous, management services exposed. Essentially, that would just be kind of targeting those. Anything I can access in your environment from the internet would be the target there. Internal, you kind of look at that internal perspective of things. So, like, what happens if somebody gets into that network? So, let's say you're in an office and you host, a bunch of servers, you got a bunch of, user PCs, that sort of thing. Let's say somebody did get access to that network. What kind of damage could they do from that perspective? So those are the two different kind of main types of network testing that I do a lot. Web application and mobile application testing are also something that comes up a lot, especially recently. They're similar in a lot of ways. There are some, critical differences. Obviously, mobile applications, you kind of actually have to tear apart the application on the phone, whereas web application testing, there's none of that. But a lot of that deals with web traffic between the client and the server. So, between the browser and the and essentially the application server, and the mobile. In that case, it'd be the app and the server on the other side there. And so that's a lot of just kind of poking around HTTP and seeing what you can break there.
And why is a penetration test so critical? In the compliance world, we're looking at, policies and procedures, and we do audits, and we're looking at gaps, and we're looking at holes. And we do ask our clients, have you had a penetration test in the last 12 months? Is there a requirement by law? No. However, if you don't know what doors are open, right, to your environment, then you don't know what you don't know. So give me some examples. Why is a pen test so critical to secure a business?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, you can think of it in some ways as being pretty similar to the need for QA.
Okay.
So like you're releasing a product, you need to know if there is flaws in it. This is at a basic level, it's that similar thing, but in this case, can I attack it? And there, like I said, there really is a different kind of mindset going into it than something like that QA process. So if you, for example, there are certain types of vulnerabilities, like let's say I've built a shopping application that has a remote code execution vulnerability. And what that means is that I can execute a program or script on your server by taking advantage of this flaw. So I can essentially run something on your server that you really wouldn't want me to run generally. That's the type of issue that you may not necessarily find in QA. More modern QA practices incorporate a lot more security than they used to, but there's still gaps. It's still very much from a QA perspective, and not much from I'm an attacker. How can I actually get at you?
Yeah.
So in this case, it would be, let's say I found this vulnerability. It's a manner of exploiting it, looking around the server, seeing if there's anything else I can do, anything else I can exploit from there, getting what information I can. And in this case, letting the client know what's going on with that so they can get it fixed before somebody else finds it that might be less, they might have worse intentions than I do.
That isn't ethical.
It isn't ethical, right?
And we've gotten a couple questions lately from our clients. What are some negative side effects of a pen test, if any? And maybe just side effects, during business hours or after business hours. Can stuff happen when you're in there, whether it's you're looking at their external IPs or internal IPs?
It's definitely a risk, but in my experience, it's incredibly minimal.
Okay.
Anytime you're kind of doing something, it's an adversarial, testing practice. So there's always some risk that something's going to go down or something's going to be negatively affected by what we're doing. However, I can only count, one or two times where something has really been having a serious negative impact. One of those times was, it was like a test environment, and there was also a really weird design choice where the developers had a button where you could actually essentially delete the entire database in the web application.
Oh.
And so it was a really weird design choice. And so that one I don't really count. It is a fun story.
So you delete databases.
Whenever possible, yes.
Ethically,
yes.
Ethically delete. There you go. Use ethically.
Yeah. Grass-fed, ethically deleted database.
Grass-fed, grass-finished. So that's how we handle disaster recovery tests, right? How can we restore the data? So you were just helping that client. That's all, Jay.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. And I am looking at branching out into that field.
So break it, see if you can fix it.
So if anybody wants to do disaster recovery at the same time, just kidding. But yeah, realistically, there's the issues are very minimal.
Okay.
There's not there. I would definitely say that if you're looking to do a pen test, and there are times that are particularly sensitive, like let's say that you patch every Wednesday at 2 p.m. or something. That might be a time where if you're organizing a test or planning a test, that might be a time you say, hey, can you just not, run anything on the network during these hours?
Yeah.
Or if, there's like just any particularly sensitive operation that might require, servers to be running completely optimally, you might want to kind of block that off. But I've done a bunch of tests at a bunch of different times. And even ones during, normal office hours, I've never had anybody come to have any serious problems.
Okay.
You have to. Modern devices are pretty good at handling a lot of this stuff. It wasn't the case a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. That puts our listeners at ease. I would guess that there's more side effects if a business doesn't perform a penetration test.
I would say, yeah, I would be much more worried because even as far as, counting the side effects to the types of side effects you get out of a pen test, the biggest risk you've got is for some reason a host being completely destroyed, which is not really going to happen unless you've got a completely careless pen tester trying to exploit denial of service vulnerabilities or certain types of exploits, not doing any research on what's going on. That's I've never seen that personally. Out of all the people I've talked to in this industry, I've never heard of that actually happening. But theoretically, it can. But I mean, even then, overall getting a test, you could the same could be said that it would be almost better to have that. This is going to sound weird, but even if that did happen, almost better to have somebody you trust doing that than having some random person that's just poking around the internet. So ideally, you want to find a tester that's professional, can identify those things, and then also not exploit them if it's going to cause actual problems, but also so that you can fix them. And like I said, that's generally how things go. You identify something and then it can be fixed instead of somebody nefarious actually doing something bad.
Right. That makes sense. And then what are some of the biggest risks or holes that you find, in your experience of pen testing, and can someone be 100% buttoned up?
Well, nobody is 100% buttoned up. It's kind of perhaps a cynical take, but I always view information security and hacking as like it's only a matter of time. And while that's not necessarily like strictly true, I mean, it from a theoretical sense, if somebody was given enough time, they could theoretically compromise any system. So I would say that the biggest risks I find overall, especially for smaller organizations, which is who I primarily work with, a lot of times they expose way too much to the internet. You kind of think that's kind of like your front line, if you will. And so the more kind of holes you allow in your front line, the more places there, the more like spots there are for somebody trying to attack you to find a gap or a way into your network. So really, that's one of the easily one of the biggest things I can find. Also, one of the easiest things to fix too, in a lot of ways.
That's great to know. To know.
What's like one of the most common problems you find?
Network wise, I see a lot of times systems using default or really weak credentials. So you've got some admin account that's got a really weak password. And I focus on those a lot because that can be one of the easiest ways to compromise a system and get further in. So there's one case in the past where I was doing a test and I found this one, it was like a management system that essentially managed other systems, like essentially you could run scripts on other systems from this one piece of software. And they had, it was like, in this case, it was just a test, right? So they weren't actually, using it for very many systems. They were just trying it out on a couple places. But because of that, they hadn't locked it down all. They hadn't gone through any of their processes for, making sure passwords were changed and whatnot. So I, got in, using a default admin account and, the default password for that account. And I was able to compromise the underlying host just because now I got into the system and could run whatever scripts I wanted through this application that was running on this host. And so that, that'll give you a really good foothold on the network. If you get something like that, it's like, it's just a really quick and easy way in if you're coming at it from a attacker's perspective. So change passwords.
Change passwords or go to passphrases, right? Or now even store, the random hexadecimal passcodes and phrases that are, yes, there's, Chrome does it, Safari does it, Keychains do it, or use KeyPass or something, right? Whatever you prefer.
Password managers. That's a big recommendation.
You should remember your
password. A strong master password.
I mean, really, you should.
No, really, they're,
use your Touch ID, Finger ID. Well, that'd be the same thing, but Face ID, or have a master password and go through all that.
Yeah. Remember, just remember your master password, and then don't even think about the rest. Just get a real strong password.
So, are you saying not to put my password on a sticky note on my desk?
The funny part is, I would actually say that's way more secure than a lot of practices for passwords I've seen.
Wow. We should do another podcast on passwords.
Yes, we'll do a password podcast. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we know about passwords. Now, what's like a fun, I don't know. I feel you're like a private investigator, James, right? You're digging in, you're in the trenches, you look at the stuff. What's like a oh boy issue, or what's kind of something interesting that you found in your years of ethically hacking?
There's a lot of oh boy issues, and definitely the feeling of when you get a good finding is you feel very elated, and then you feel kind of sad because you shouldn't be elated because you're gonna have to tell somebody essentially some bad news. Now, luckily, it's so they can fix it, but it's still like I shouldn't be happy. I shouldn't be as happy about this as I am. But no, I think some of the most fun vulnerabilities I find Shockingly frequently it's a web application vulnerability.
Okay.
So that means that, in this case, I'd be testing, somebody's like use the example earlier of like a shopping website.
Mm-hmm.
So something like that. In this case, I find a lot of what are called privilege escalation vulnerabilities, where essentially you can come into an application as a normal user, and you can kind of mess with web traffic in such a way that I can make myself an administrator by, making certain calls to, depends on their the structure of their site, but essentially making certain web requests. A lot of times they're not protected properly, and those are really fun to find because suddenly I now have an administrator account, and I can do what I want.
Wow.
At least within whatever the administrator is allowed to do.
You have a good contract, don't you? Now there is to that little caveat I threw in there. I mean, yes, when we do a penetration test and we work with James and James works with our customers, there is a level of risk, and we go through that risk and we help make sure your customers, you understand, listeners here, you understand what the risk looks like and get windows we're comfortable with to perform the test. It's very, very rare that anything would happen, but you're right. You got to prepare for that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And as we go through here, I'm thinking of what we always like to give listeners some actions. And I know you've written out some really good bits and pieces here, and I think we're going to go through this, but what can listeners today, what can they take back to their organizations? And now that we're all cloud, I mean, we're recording this in the cloud. Everything's in the cloud. We're not even real anymore. We got a metaverse, which that's scary. I didn't want to go there. That's a whole other podcast. So
that'll be the privacy episode.
Okay. Here, we'll just throw the curveball in here, James. 1, 2, 3. What does your gut say about the metaverse?
Oh, immediate negative reaction, but
run quickly.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I deleted Facebook a long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, I say deleted as if they're not keeping that data somewhere. Yeah,
it is. It's a giant data machine. So yeah, we know that. So what are some actions our listeners can take back? What's your recommendations as an owner, as a pen tester and a professional that folks can take back to their businesses to prepare for a pen test?
Yeah. So let's say you're kind of starting to think about a pen test. I definitely would recommend kind of figuring out what your security maturity level is. Like, are you completely new to thinking about security as a business need? Are you somewhere in the middle, maybe, where you started thinking about that stuff, you started putting some resources into it? If you're well advanced, you've probably already thought about these things already. But you definitely want to kind of determine that, because that is going to inform the pen test and kind of the approach you want to take. And that's going to bring me into kind of my second item of determining what the goals are for your pen test, right? So kind of take that information from determining where you're at security wise, and figure out what you really want out of the test. Like, are there certain areas you're particularly worried about? Are you just trying to figure out generally where you're at security wise? And if so, maybe and from there you can take that dial in the scope, right? If you're brand new, you might want to have a super small scope, super narrow scope, just to figure out what exactly, those really critical areas, and figure out what you need to work on in those areas before expanding it, right? So you can have, let's take a network test, for example. A lot of times I'll do tests that include both, external testing and internal testing. That external testing is generally much smaller than the internal testing. And when you're first starting out, if you've not done any security work at all, a lot of times people benefit way more from that external side than the internal side. Yeah. Because I can tell you that if we do both, we're probably going to find a ton of findings if you've never thought about security before. And that can be kind of overwhelming. So a lot of times it's, it's best to take the highest risk area and focus on that first before we go into the things where we really shore up your defenses, that defense in depth type stuff. Yep.
Goals are big, like anything, life, business, family, anything, right? Where do we want to go? Because the sky's the limit. I mean, you can test things, anything with an IP address, you could test.
You can test for hours and hours and never stop. Yeah. I mean, you can test forever and you'll never find anything. I mean, the goal of pen tests are to ultimately reduce risk. You're trying to figure out as many things as possible so that you don't have this. So the risk of somebody else finding those things are much lower.
Yeah. And what about cost? You don't have to say cost, but say scope, budget. Let's go with budget, right? People have no idea. It's very ambiguous. What's budget? So set a budget and a goal. is what I'm assuming.
Yep. Set a budget, set a goal, and a lot of times, I know in my case, I don't know about, I can't speak for every company. I've got some different business circumstances than others, but I try and make sure that my scoping is very flexible. So if you're limited by budget, this is my case, just talk about it. I say like, hey, just bring that up, because like I said, you can essentially test for forever, but you can also take that testing scope and, like I said, narrow it to make sure it really only hits those areas that you really need to focus on. And then you can always expand it later. I mean, you can always come back later and do another test, or maybe target a different area. It's best when these things are a little bit more flexible, especially when you're not as familiar with security. When you're just kind of first starting out.
And I think, we've been doing this for a while, and Don as well, is really educate the customers and the listeners of, let's start small. So, let's do maybe just a test for the cloud first. Okay. And then maybe go into the application. Okay. And then, if there is an office location, then maybe we'll go test that firewall. Okay. And then determine, do we need to go into the internal network or not? So kind of slow steps, kind of, baby steps, if you will.
Yep.
Yep, definitely. Well, this has been really good, James. Really, I think enlightened us. I always learn more when I talk to you. And no, folks, he's not in mom's basement, so that's good. He's a little.
Oh, excuse me, I'm in my own upstairs office. Thank you. I only sleep in my own. It's nice and cool down there.
Exactly. In the winter you go up, it's warm. In the summer you go down, it's cool. Yep.
Yep.
So if listeners want to learn more, right, and have you kind of do a deep dive, how can they contact you?
Yeah. Well, there's a few ways. I mean, if you reach out to Rob, it'll eventually filter its way to me, I imagine. Rob likes talking to me.
We do.
You can give him. Also, you can go on my website. That would be Tetsu.Tech, Testsu.Tech. Or you can, probably the most reliable way really is just to email me directly at james@Tetsu.Tech. So james@Tetsu.Tech.
Yep. And we'll go ahead and put all that in the show notes down below, so everybody knows how to click and find James in the ether. So definitely. Well, wonderful. Well, James, so much. So thank you. Thank you, friend. Thank you for coming on the VanRein Compliance Podcast. Don and I just really appreciate it. And thank you for educating the listeners and letting people know it's critical, especially because, the one thing we didn't talk about a little bit, we'll just touch on right now, is everybody assumes the cloud is safe. I'm at Amazon, I'm at Google, I'm at Azure, I'm here, I'm there. Somebody sold me a cheap cloud, and don't assume it's safe. It's going to be quick and easy, but it's not going to be safe. So,
yeah, you definitely need to take care with anything. I mean, there's a lot of tools there for security, but you do need to be careful still.
Yep. And if you have questions, reach out to us. Obviously, here on the podcast, reach out at VanReinCompliance.com, and we'll chat and we'll figure out what you need and do a quick discovery call. Yep, definitely. Well, thank you for listening to the VanRein Compliance Podcast, the show that secures the future of your business with a clear plan to reduce your risk. Remember to subscribe where you listen to podcasts and rate and review, so these tips and tricks can go out to more businesses that we can secure. Thank you so much for listening. Exciting to see you next week.